Sorry, this desk is for successful people only, I heard myself say. My sister giggled and pointed me to the far table near the trash cans. Everyone around me smiled as I sat down alone. When the bill arrived, for $2,800, I simply said, "Let the successful people pay for it," and you should have seen their faces when they found out it was my restaurant. So, so, s- Sorry, this table is for successful people only, I heard myself say, as I froze with the gift bag in my hands. The Olympus restaurant glowed with dozens of crystal chandeliers reflected in the mirrored walls. I was 20 minutes late. I had to stay late for a job interview, which, by all accounts, I'd failed. Another one. My sister Diana's 32nd birthday party was in full swing, and the long table in the center of the room was surrounded by festively dressed guests with glasses of champagne. Evie finally deigned to show up. Diana rolled her eyes, fixing her perfect style. Her emerald dress emphasized her flawless figure. But darling, we're only here with established people, so you won't be interested. The silence around the table was deafening. Then someone chuckled, and the tension dissipated with a wave of awkward laughs. Diana, I began, but she interrupted, pointing to a small table in the corner, just off the passage to the kitchen. You'll be more comfortable there. So as not to embarrass the guests with your circumstances. Mom and Dad sat next to Diana, and I waited for at least one of them to intervene. Mom wrinkled her nose slightly, but continued studying the menu. Dad didn't even look up. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I silently made my way to the designated table. My worn ballet flats clung awkwardly to the fluffy carpet, causing me to stumble. My gray dress, bought on sale 3 years ago, seemed invisible against the designer outfits of the guests. I carefully placed the gift, a set of vintage French perfume I'd spent half my last paycheck on the edge of the main table and sat down in my corner. The waiter, a young guy with perfectly styled hair, gave me a sympathetic look as he brought me a menu. "What will you have?" he asked, and I could clearly hear the pity in his voice. "Just water, thanks," I whispered, feeling my cheeks blush. Absorbed in my own thoughts, I watched my sister shining in the spotlight. Diana had always been like that, bright, loud, magnetic. We shared a room as kids, but even then, it was clear we were from different worlds. She's a future star, I'm a perpetual statistic. The last 3 months have been a nightmare. After 10 years at a marketing company, I was downsized along with half the department. Budget optimization, they called it. 10 years of dedicated work, canceled vacations, and night shifts, all for the sake of a line on a termination notice. At 32, I found myself without a job, without prospects, and it seemed, without a future. My parents, of course, found out from Diane before I did. "Maybe this is a sign that you should finally find yourself," Mom said over the phone, and I could hear her interjecting with Dad. In their minds, finding herself meant marrying a wealthy man, as she herself had once done. Never mind that their marriage had long ago become a cold formality. I was brought out of my reverie by an explosion of laughter at the head table. Diana was saying something, gesticulating vigorously, and the guests were listening to her every word. "That's what I told that creative director. If you want real talent, be prepared to pay for it." She raised her glass triumphantly. And guess what? They gave me a 30% raise. Applause. Cheers of admiration. Mom blotted the corners of her eyes, clearly touched. "My daughter is a real fighter," Dad said proudly, and I shuddered, remembering the way he'd crinkled his nose when I'd asked him for advice after I'd been fired. "Evie," he'd said then, "some people just aren't cut out for big accomplishments." And there's no shame in that. None of them knew that for 10 years I'd been living a double life, a humble mid-level marketer by day and a student of restaurant management and investment courses in the evenings. No one knew that I was saving 60% of every paycheck, denying myself new clothes, vacations, even a decent cup of coffee in the morning. No one guessed that 4 years ago I met Frank, an elderly restaurateur who believed in me and became my mentor. And of course, no one suspected that 6 months ago, through an anonymous company, I had bought a controlling interest in Olympus Restaurant, Diana's favorite place, where she always celebrated her birthdays, bragging about her successes. I watched the plates of exquisite dishes pass by, listened to the clinking of crystal glasses, inhaled the scent of fresh flowers, and thought about how strange it was to feel invisible in my own restaurant. The waiters didn't know who I was. Not even the manager, Mark, knew that. Only the finance director, the shrewd elderly Ruth, knew who really owned the controlling interest. The evening dragged on endlessly. Diane unwrapped my gift, along with dozens of others, glimpsed the perfume, and put it aside without even thanking me. Her new boyfriend, James, a successful lawyer, presented her with diamond earrings, eliciting rapturous gasps. "Evie," my mom called out to me as the guests moved on to dessert. "Would you like to join us? It's your sister's birthday after all." I was about to get up when Diana sighed theatrically. "Mom, let's not spoil the evening with talk of failure and job hunting. It's a holiday!" My cheeks burned, but I silently returned to my seat. All my life I'd been a convenient Evie, someone to forget about, someone to push into a corner, someone whose role it was to admire the success of others. I'd never argued, never had a relationship, never demanded respect. Maybe that's why no one took me seriously. Toward midnight, Mark showed up with a leather folder. I knew it contained an astronomical bill. "You don't get cheap dinners at the Olympus." "The bill for a lovely evening," he announced, handing the folder to my father. He opened it and paled slightly. I knew exactly how much it was. $2,820, including the premium champagne Diana had ordered. "Why don't we split it?" he suggested uncertainly, looking around at the guests. Most pretended not to hear. Some began to gather. "Dad, you're the one who invited everyone to celebrate my birthday," Diana pouted. "I thought you planned the whole thing." I saw him nervously pull out his credit card. I knew my parents were living on a shoestring budget after retirement, and the recent renovations to their house had hit their finances hard. "Unemployed Evie should definitely not be a part of this," Diana said with a chuckle, and something in me finally snapped. I rose slowly and walked over to their table. "Mark," I called out to the manager. He turned, smiling politely. "Yes, ma'am?" "You don't need to pay the bill," I said calmly. There was silence. Diana snorted. "Evie, if you don't even have money for your own apartment, you don't need to be a hero." Mark looked from me to Diana with a perplexed look. Dash Ms. ... He hesitated, not knowing what to call me. "Morrison," I prompted. "Evelyn Morrison?" Mark's eyes widened, and he straightened, instantly changing his tone. "Ms. Morrison!" We didn't know you were here. Ruth said the owner might show up, but I didn't realize." Now it was Diana's turn to blink confusedly. She set down her glass, the wine spilling onto the tablecloth. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. "Who's the owner?" I allowed myself to smile for the first time all evening. "Let the successful people pay for it," I said, looking my sister straight in the eye. "But since this is my restaurant, I think tonight's dinner is on the house." There was a ringing silence. I could see my father's jaw drop, my mother's frown deepen. Diana's face turn crimson. "What the hell is this?" she finally squeezed out. "You can't own Olympus. It's one of the most successful restaurants in the city." "Everest Investments bought a controlling interest 6 months ago," I replied flatly. "I am the sole owner of this company. If you want to make sure, Mark can show you the documents." I felt dozens of eyes on me, but for the first time in years, I wasn't embarrassed. The awkward silence was interrupted by James, Diana's boyfriend. "Wait, so this is the mysterious investor? This deal was in the Business Herald." Diana turned sharply toward him. "Did you know?" "Of course I didn't." He defended himself. "It's just that the deal was high profile. No one knew who was behind it." My father, finally regaining his speech, spoke slowly. "Evelyn, is it true?" I nodded, feeling strangely light. 10 years of pretending, 10 years of living in the shadows, 10 years of silently accepting the role of loser-all for this moment. Absolutely true, Dad, I replied. I think we have a lot to talk about, but not tonight. Mark, would you please show the guests out? The party was over. I sat in my apartment, looking at an old photograph. Two girls, ages 11 and 8, standing by the Christmas tree. The younger one, Diana, in a bright red dress, with a wide smile and sparkling eyes. Me, the older one, in a brown sweater, a pale shadow against my sister. Our story began this way. The bright sun and his faithful companion, always in the shadows. The barrage of messages after last night's revelation at the restaurant hadn't subsided. I turned off my phone. None of them, neither my parents nor Diana, deserved an explanation. Not now. For 10 years, I'd been a ghost of my own life. 10 years of saving up not only money, but resentment. Now I had to figure out what to do with this sudden freedom. Memories came in waves. A school play where Diana played the lead and I helped backstage. Parents in the front row, with flowers for the youngest. For me, an absent-minded, "You did good too, Evie." Or graduation, when Diane was named the most promising student of the year, and I received only modest praise for my success in math. My dad said, "Numbers are good, but people rule the world, and you're no good with people." Every time I tried to step out of the shadows, something pushed me back in. Usually, that something was my own family. I remember my 21st birthday especially vividly. We were sitting on the veranda of my parents' house, eating my mom's apple pie. I had just finished my 3rd year of economics with honors, and finally had the courage to share my dream. You know, I'm thinking of not going straight to the corporation after university. I began cautiously. I have an idea to open a small cafe. Something cozy, with homemade food. Mom froze with the kettle in her hands. Dad looked up from the paper. Diana jumped with laughter, not hiding her surprise. "A cafe? You?" She shook her head. "Evie, you faint when you have to reprimand a waiter. Business requires toughness." My father folded the paper. "You're too soft for this, daughter. Start with something easier. Get a steady job, like Uncle Robert suggested. But I studied business planning and—" "Theory and practice are different," Mom interrupted. "Look at your sister. At 19, she's already interning at an advertising agency because she knows how to sell herself." Diana glowed. At 19, she really shone. Bright, assertive, with an innate talent for charming people. She'd gotten the internship through her boyfriend, but she hadn't told her parents about it. "I can learn," I said quietly. My father sighed with that special tone he reserved for moments of frustration with me. "Evelyn, some people just can't lead. You're a wonderful girl, but be realistic. Find a good corporation, marry a decent man. That's what happiness is for people like you." That night, I swore to myself that I would never share my dreams with them again. And I kept my word. After university, I got a job at a marketing agency. It was boring, but stable. At the same time, I enrolled in evening courses in restaurant management. I told my parents it was for professional development. They showed no interest. It was there, at the course, that I met Jay. Tall, confident, he taught basic financial planning. I fell in love with his ambition, his ability to fill a room with energy, all the things I was missing. Our romance developed rapidly. 6 months later, we were married. A quiet ceremony, no big deal. My parents were discreetly pleased. Evie's finally settled. Diane showed up with her new boyfriend, a top manager of an international company, and spent the entire evening talking about her career successes, overshadowing even my wedding day. The first 2 years with Jay were happy ones. Or so it seemed to me. I shared with him my plans for my own restaurant, showed him sketches of my business model. He listened, nodded, sometimes offered advice. I felt heard for the first time in my life. And then he was promoted. He went from being a course teacher to a financial consultant for a large restaurant chain. New social circle, new ambitions. I went to work, saving up money for a startup capital, taking extra courses on weekends. We saw each other less and less. On the day of our third anniversary, I came home early, ready to surprise him. The surprise was waiting for me. Jay in our bed with a colleague, a bright blonde, a development manager for the same restaurant chain. Caroline, that was her name, didn't even look embarrassed as she pulled on her dress. Jay said you were running late, she said as she walked past. Though from what he told me, you're always late. That night, it turned out it wasn't the first time he'd cheated. You're always somewhere in your thoughts, Evie, Jay said as he packed his things. I wanted a wife and got a roommate with a business plan instead of a heart. The divorce was quick. The parents reacted with predictable disappointment. We told you needed to focus more on your family. Diane texted, I sympathize, but you can always start over. It was like my life was a rough draft that could just be crossed out. It was then, devastated and alone, that I stumbled upon a small Italian restaurant called Frank's 2 blocks from home. A cozy place with cracked plaster and the most delicious tiramisu in town. I started going there every Friday, sitting with a book in the corner, watching the place work. Frank, a gray-haired Italian with kind eyes and a loud laugh, noticed me on the 4th Friday. Are you studying my menu or my staff? He asked, taking a seat at the table. I was embarrassed, but admitted, your business. I want to open something similar someday. Instead of the mockery I had expected, he smiled broadly. Finally, someone with a brain. Everyone wants Michelin stars, but the real restaurant business starts with places like this. And so began the most important period of my life. Frank became my mentor. At first, just talking over a cup of espresso, then I started helping with accounting, then organizing supplies. He introduced me to chefs, waiters, suppliers. A restaurant isn't the walls or the food, Frank said. It's people and relationships. I learned more in 2 years than in all the courses combined. At the same time, I saved every dollar I could, lived modestly, avoiding any unnecessary spending. Diane laughed at my poverty. My parents sighed. But for the first time, I felt like I was on my own path. When Frank learned that I had saved a significant amount of money, he introduced me to the world of restaurant investment. Don't start from scratch, he advised. Dash. Find a promising place and become a partner. Learn from other people's mistakes before you make your own. He also introduced me to Ruth, the CFO of several successful restaurants. Tough, principled, she had no tolerance for nonsense, but she saw potential in me. You don't look like a typical investor, she said when we first met. You listen too closely and talk too little about yourself. That's a good thing. With her help, I started investing small sums in promising places. The first profits seemed like a miracle. Money earned not by hours in the office, but by bold decisions. I reinvested every cent, expanding my portfolio. When Ruth hinted 3 years ago that the owners of Olympus, Diana's favorite restaurant, where she always celebrated her birthdays and showed off her successes, were looking for an investor, I didn't immediately decide. The sum was huge. Think strategically, Ruth advised. It's not just a restaurant, it's status, connections, reputation. I sold shares in other restaurants, took out a loan against my investment, risked everything I'd accumulated over the years. The deal went through a shell company that Ruth and I called Everest Investments. No one knew the real owner. For 6 months, I watched the restaurant from afar, receiving reports, making menu and staffing changes through Ruth. Olympus became even more successful, and I was still the faceless, humble Evie to everyone who knew me. And so, yesterday, sitting in my own restaurant on the outskirts of town, listening to my sister's taunts, I finally took off my mask. The moment of triumph I'd been working toward for 10 years. The faces of my parents, Diana's eyes, the whispers of the guests. It should have all been satisfying. But now, looking at the childhood photograph, I felt nothing but emptiness. It was as if revenge was a cake from a shop window, beautiful but completely tasteless. For 10 years, I'd built a life around wanting to prove something to people who might not even be worth it. The phone I turned on this morning was bursting with notifications. 15 missed ones from my mom, 7 from my dad, 32 messages from Diane, ranging from accusations to attempts at reconciliation. Amidst this flurry was one from Ruth. "I need to talk to you. Frank is in the hospital." I set the photograph aside. The triumph was hollow, but life went on, and I had to decide what to do with it next. For the third day, my phone didn't stop ringing. It seemed the whole family suddenly remembered I existed. Mom called every morning, starting the conversation with the phrase, "We always believed in you. We just didn't want to push you." Dad sent an awkward message, "Proud of you, daughter. We'll talk when you calm down." The most messages were from Diane, ranging from angry accusations to attempts at reconciliation. "You set this up on purpose to humiliate me in front of my friends. 10 years planning this setup? How can you be so vindictive?" Or, "We need to talk." Like grown-ups. "You're my sister, after all." I didn't answer. I sat in a small office in the back of Olympus, poring over financial reports and thinking about Frank. After the message from Ruth, I went straight to the hospital. The diagnosis was disappointing: terminal pancreatic cancer. Frank was doing well, joking with the nurses, but I could see how much he had lost weight, how his features had sharpened. "Evie, don't look at me like that," he said with a wave of his hand. "I'm 78, and I've lived a good life. Tell me how your relatives reacted to your little surprise." I did, and he laughed until he coughed. Then he got serious and asked, "Did it make you feel better?" I didn't know what to say. Revenge was pointless. For 10 years, I'd made plans to prove something to people that maybe weren't worth the effort. I was interrupted by a call from Mark, the manager of the Olympus. "Ms. Morrison, you have a visitor. Says she's your sister." I sighed. It was to be expected. "Show her into my office." 5 minutes later, the door swung open and Diane walked in. Impeccably dressed even in this situation, she looked confident, but I noticed she was nervously fiddling with the strap of her designer handbag. "So this is where the secret investor is hiding," she said, looking around the modest office. "I was expecting something more impressive." "What do you want, Diana?" I asked without getting up from my desk. She sat across from me, cross-legged. "An explanation, for starters. How long have you been planning this? Did you wait until my birthday to humiliate me as much as possible?" I shook my head. "Not everything in this world revolves around you. I bought the restaurant because it was a good investment. The fact that it's your favorite place is a coincidence." "Coincidence?" she snorted. "You've hated me since you were a kid." "Jealous? Jealous?" I laughed involuntarily. "Jealous of what? Your ability to use people? Your ability to always be the center of attention? Or the way you make your parents dance to your tune?" Diana pressed her lips into a thin line. "You have no idea the pressure I feel every day. To be the perfect daughter, the perfect employee, perfect at everything. No one asked you to be perfect. You chose that role. And you chose to be a victim." Her voice rose. "Poor Evie, invisible Evie, always in the shadows. You loved it when no one expected anything from you. No expectations, no responsibility." I looked at my sister carefully. Behind the bright exterior and bold tone, I saw for the first time the tiredness in the corners of her eyes, the nervous twitching of her fingers. "What do you really want, Diana?" I asked quietly. She turned away to the window. "I don't know. Probably to understand how my hapless older sister had suddenly become the owner of the restaurant I'd spent years bringing friends to brag about. I worked, saved, invested, every day for 10 years. But why in secret? Why not say anything?" I sighed. "Would you have listened? The last time I told you about my dream of opening a restaurant, you and your parents ridiculed me. 'You're too soft for business,' remember?" Diana frowned, clearly not remembering that conversation. It was one of many for her, a turning point for me. "I always thought you were happy to be in the shadows," she said quietly, "that you were comfortable. And I thought you were happy to be the center of attention." We stopped talking. The city rumbled outside the window, but there was a heavy silence in the office. "You know," Diana finally said, "I've always envied your calmness, your confidence." "My confidence?" I raised my eyebrows in surprise. You always knew who you were, even when my parents compared us, even when I was prom queen and you were sitting with a book. You were real. I always felt like I was playing a role. I was silent, not knowing what to say. I never thought Diana could see me that way. So what now? She asked. You've proven you're more successful than all of us. You've won. It's not a competition, Diana. And to be honest, I don't feel like I won. She gave me a hard look. Then what's this all about? That's a good question. Why? I didn't know the answer myself. Probably to prove to myself that I could, that I wasn't just a shadow. Diana stood up, fixing her flawless hair. Well, congratulations. You're not a shadow anymore. You're the boss. There was a mixture of respect and bitterness in her voice. She headed for the door, but stopped at the threshold. By the way, you're not the only one who's been faking it. I got fired 2 weeks ago. That story about the 30% raise, it was made up. The truth is, I'm desperately looking for a job. But no one knows about it, not even my parents. So maybe we're more alike than we think. She walked away, leaving me confused. This meeting didn't bring reconciliation, but it did change something. For the first time, I saw the real Diana, not the perfect image she'd cultivated over the years. My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Ruth. We have a problem, she said without preamble. After the incident at the birthday party, there were several negative comments on social media. Allegedly, we discriminate against customers, dividing them into successful and not. It's absurd, of course, but Olympus's reputation is at risk. Shit. I rubbed my temples. What do you suggest? We need to make an official statement, and maybe hold some kind of charity event to show that we're an inclusive institution. I agreed, and having finished talking, went to the restaurant's kitchen. We needed to discuss changes to the menu for next week, and I preferred to do it in person. The kitchen was bustling with activity. The chefs were preparing for the evening's influx of customers, the clatter of knives mingling with the commands of the sous chefs. In the center of this controlled chaos stood a tall man with a serious face and piercing blue eyes. Dash Ms. Morrison. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the sauce. We rarely see you in the kitchen. Nate Foster, chef at the Olympus. The only one I personally chose after purchasing the restaurant. Frank recommended him, and it was the best staffing decision. Just Evelyn, please. I stepped closer. We need to discuss the menu. Nate gestured to his assistants and turned to me. I heard about your, incognito disclosure. Impressive, though somewhat theatrical. His candor always surprised me. In a world where everyone tried to please me after finding out who I was, his honesty was a breath of fresh air. Not the smartest move, I admitted. Now we have a reputation problem. It's manageable, he shrugged. The quality of the food speaks for itself. But if you want my opinion, it's high time we freshened up the concept. Olympus is too pretentious, too exclusionary. What do you suggest? More seasonal dishes, local produce, less emphasis on status, more on flavor authenticity. We talked for about an hour. Nate wasn't shy about criticizing my ideas, offering his own, arguing. At one point, I caught myself thinking that he was the first person since Frank with whom I could be completely honest. By the way, how's Frank? He asked, as if he'd read my mind. I went to visit him this weekend. Not so good. I shook my head. The doctors say he's got a few weeks left, maybe a month. Nate nodded silently. He'd been Frank's apprentice years ago, and they shared a deep affection. He's told me a lot about you, Nate said suddenly. Said you reminded him of his daughter. The same determination, the same stubbornness. I didn't know Frank had a daughter. He never talked about his family. She died young, Nate continued, seeing my surprise. A car accident. Frank always said you were like a second chance for him. That information stunned me. So many years with Frank, and I hadn't even bothered to ask about his past. Was too focused on my goals, my pain. I have to go, I said, suddenly feeling an urgent need to see Frank. We'll discuss the details of the new menu tomorrow. Tell him I said hi, Nate said quietly. Take care of yourself. Success has its price. The hospital told me that Frank's condition had deteriorated. He was hooked up to oxygen, and his breathing was labored. I sat down beside the bed, taking his wrinkled hand in mine. Evie, my girl, he smiled weakly. How was your meeting with your sister? I told him about the conversation with Diana, the problems with the restaurant, the plans for the future. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes closing his eyes from fatigue. You know, he said when I finished, when I lost Laura, my daughter, I thought I'd never be happy again. I plunged into work, opening restaurants one after another, thought success would fill the void. He coughed, and I brought a glass of water to his lips. But you know what I realized? He continued after a pause. Success is not an endpoint, it's a journey, and it matters who you walk it with. My wife left me because I couldn't stop, always proving something to the world. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. Frank squeezed my hand tighter. Don't make the same mistakes I did, Evie. You've proven you can be successful. Now learn to be happy. His words cut to the heart of my doubts. 10 years of chasing the specter of success, of recognition, of revenge. I had it all, and I felt empty. I don't know how, I said honestly. My whole life has been built around that goal. Start with forgiveness, Frank said quietly. Forgive your parents for not seeing your potential. Forgive your sister for her weaknesses. But most of all, forgive yourself for living other people's expectations for so long. He closed his eyes, tired from the conversation. I sat next to him, holding his hand until he fell asleep. A nurse peeked into the room and quietly said, I'd better leave. Frank needs rest. He's very proud of you, you know, she added as she walked me out. He's always talking about his talented student who has surpassed her teacher. I walked out of the hospital into the cool evening, tears welling up in my eyes. Frank was dying, and I was only now beginning to realize how important he was in my life. The only person who believed in me unconditionally, who saw not a shadow, but a person. The phone rang again. Diana's name popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a second, then answered. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe it was time for forgiveness. For a new beginning. The rain drummed against the black umbrellas. A small group of people gathered around a freshly dug grave in Riverside Cemetery. Frank had gone quietly, in his sleep, 3 days ago. His funeral had been modest, just as he had wanted. No lavish speeches, no extra ceremony. Just loved ones coming to say goodbye. I stood next to Nate, feeling strangely numb. I'd spent more time at the hospital in the last month than I had anywhere else. Frank and I had talked about the past, the future, restaurants, and life. Every conversation now seemed precious. He was happy at the end, Nate said quietly when the ceremony was over. He saw that his legacy was in good hands. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Frank's last words stayed in my head. You've proven you can be successful. Now learn to be happy. That evening, I sat in my office, mechanically reviewing reports. The figures blurred before my eyes. Olympus was thriving, despite the recent scandal. Or maybe because of it. Nothing attracts attention like drama. Now everyone wanted to see the restaurant with the mysterious owner. The success I'd longed for had finally arrived. But the price was high. Frank was right. I had built a life on wanting to prove something, not on what I truly loved. The next morning, I asked Nate to come into the office. I need some time, I said without preamble. I want you to take over the restaurant temporarily. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. Are you sure? We're in peak season. That's why I'm asking you. You're the only one I trust. Nate looked at me carefully. Where are you going? I don't know, I answered honestly. Just away from here. Frank said I'd forgotten why I loved this case. I want to remember. To my surprise, Nate nodded understandingly. I went through a similar thing after my divorce. Lost my zest for life. Literally, couldn't cook. Traveling helped. A week later, I was already driving down a dusty road in a rental car. No specific itinerary, no commitments. Just me, a map, and a list of small family restaurants that Frank had once compiled. The real soul of the restaurant business isn't in the Michelin stars, he used to say. It's in places where the owner knows every guest by name, where recipes are passed down from generation to generation. The first stop was an Italian trattoria in a sleepy town 3 hours away. A small establishment with worn tables and faded photographs on the walls. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, personally brought the dishes and told stories about each recipe. I sat by the window until closing time, watching the customers, mostly locals who came not only to eat, but also to socialize. Then there was a family-run Greek restaurant where 3 generations worked together. A small Mexican eatery whose tacos were a revelation. A French bistro tucked away in an alley where the chef prepared the dishes of his childhood. I spent a few days at each place, sometimes just observing, sometimes helping in the kitchen, learning. Everywhere I was welcomed with warmth, sharing secrets. No one knew I owned Olympus. I was just Evie, a traveler, a lover of good food. On the third week of the trip, Diane called. I almost dropped the call out of habit, but remembered the decision to start over. Evie? Her voice sounded unaccustomedly tentative. I'm sorry to bother you. I tried calling the restaurant, but they said you were out of town. Yes, I'm taking a little vacation, I answered, looking out the window of a small restaurant in the wine region, watching the sunset over the vineyards. Did something happen? A pause. Then a deep breath. I lost my job. Officially. What I said in your office. It was true, I was downsized a month ago, but I kept hoping I'd find something suitable. No luck. I didn't know what to say. Part of me, small and angry, was almost enjoying this moment. But the other part, the bigger part, just felt compassion. I remembered what it was like to be unemployed after years of job security. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I'm not asking for money, Diana added quickly. It's just, maybe you have some connections in the advertising industry? A recommendation? Anything. I looked at the family at the next table. Parents with 2 daughters, so similar to each other, yet so different. The younger one, bright and loud. The older one, quiet and thoughtful. And yet they were together, sharing meals, laughing. I have a better idea, I said. How about a job at Olympus? What? Diana sounded genuinely surprised. You want me to work for you? After everything? Not for me. With Nate, our chef. He's running the restaurant temporarily. He needs an event planner. You were always good at that. Long silence. Then, why are you doing this? Good question. Why? Maybe because of Frank's words of forgiveness. Maybe because I've realized over the weeks that success without people close to me is worthless. Because you're my sister, I said simply, and I think it's time for both of us to stop proving things to each other. I returned to town 2 months later with a notebook full of ideas and recipes. Olympus had changed. Nate had added a few new dishes to the menu, removed the most pretentious items, and replaced some of the expensive dishes with more authentic ones. To my surprise, the revenue didn't go down, it went up. People like authenticity, he explained as he walked me through the restaurant. They're tired of ostentatious glamour. Diana was working at the front desk, talking on the phone with a potential customer. She had changed, no arrogance, no longer haughty, but a genuine smile. When she saw me, she raised her hand in greeting, but continued the conversation. Professionalism first. She's doing a great job, Nate said. She has a talent for connecting with people. That evening, when the restaurant closed, the 3 of us sat in my office, me, Nate, and Diana. The conversation flowed easily, without the tension of before. Diana talked about her ideas for theme nights. Nate shared his plans for updating the menu. I listened, watching them, and felt strangely calm. I have a proposal, I said, when the conversation turned to the future of the restaurant. Dash. I want to change the concept of Olympus, make it a place where everyone feels welcome, not just a customer with a fat wallet. Nate smiled. I've been thinking about it ever since you left. I even have sketches of a new menu. More affordable, but no less quality. And I want you to be my partner, I added. An equal partner, with decision-making power. He blinked in surprise. Really? We've known each other less than a year. Enough to realize that you have a vision I've been missing. Diana watched us with a slight smile. You two are insufferable, she said finally. Just kiss already. I felt myself blush. Nate coughed, but didn't deny the obvious attraction between us. In the following weeks, Olympus began its transformation. We removed the gilding and crystal, replacing them with warmer, more natural materials. We added a children's menu. We launched happy hours with affordable prices during off-peak times. And most importantly, we started a program to support aspiring chefs from disadvantaged neighborhoods. The idea came when I was telling Nate about my youth, how I dreamed of owning my own restaurant, but had no connections or opportunities. How many talented people go unnoticed just because they don't get a chance to prove themselves, I said. The next day, he brought an outline of an internship program. We contacted culinary schools, community centers, even juvenile correctional facilities. They offered training, scholarships, and the opportunity to work in a professional kitchen. The first trainee was 19-year-old Zoe from a shelter for troubled teens. Skinny, with a wary eye, and an amazing talent for baking. She reminded me of me when I was younger, distrustful but determined. Diane, to my surprise, became her mentor. She helped her not only with her job, but also with her studies and finding a place to live. She reminds me of you, Diana once said, just as stubborn. We sat in an empty restaurant after closing time. For the first time in years, we spoke not as rivals, but as sisters. You know, she continued, I always thought I had to be the best at everything so that my parents would love me like they love you. I looked at her in surprise. What? They always preferred you. Diana smiled sadly. They admired my accomplishments, but loved your character. Why can't you be kind and patient like Evie? I kept hearing. It's funny, isn't it? We both thought the other was getting more love. I shook my head, realizing the irony of the situation. So many years of competing over misunderstood words and actions. We were idiots, I said. Diana laughed. Absolutely. But I don't think it's too late to fix it, do you? That evening, on the way home, I felt strangely peaceful. The life I'd built on a foundation of resentment and a desire to prove my worth had been transformed into something new, something real. Exactly 1 year had passed since the night I uttered the phrase that changed my life. Let successful people pay for it. 365 days filled with change, doubt, discovery, and new beginnings. If someone had told me then that a year later, I would be preparing a special holiday party at the completely revamped Olympus, I wouldn't have believed it. I stood in the middle of the restaurant hall, watching the team set the final accents. There was no trace of the former Olympus, with its cold grandeur and pretentious atmosphere. Now the space was filled with warm wood tones, soft lighting, live plants, and comfortable but elegant furniture. Instead of one long table for the chosen few, there were many different tables, each with its own character. In the center of the room was a large communal table where strangers could gather to share a meal and conversation. Do you like the composition? Diana's voice snapped me out of my musings. She was standing at the entrance, pointing to an intricate floral installation, a combination of wildflowers and exquisite orchids, symbolizing the restaurant's new philosophy, affordable luxury. Perfect, I smiled. As always, Diana nodded with professional pride. Over the past year, she had completely rethought her career. Starting out as an administrative assistant, she'd quickly proven that her real talent was in event management. Now she has taken the helm, bringing the creativity and attention to detail that has made Olympus a popular venue for both chamber parties and large-scale celebrations. Our relationship has changed. Not the perfect sisters from Christmas cards, but not the rivals we have been for most of our lives. We've learned to respect each other's strengths, to accept weaknesses, to speak up when we don't like something. Quarrels also happened. Habits formed over decades can't be changed in a year. But most importantly, the need to prove something to each other was gone. Nate wanted me to tell you that the desserts will be ready in half an hour, Diana said, checking her tablet. My parents confirmed they'd be here by 7, and the restaurant Herald called. They want to do a special on the Olympus transformation. I nodded, feeling slightly excited. Tonight wasn't just an anniversary celebration. We were going to announce a new project we'd been nurturing for the past few months. Do you think this will work? I asked, pointing to the clipboard where we had sketches of the new logo. Diana shrugged. The world loves rebirth stories, and yours is one of the most heartfelt. Her phone rang, and she stepped away to deal with another organizational issue. I headed to the kitchen, where Nate was working on a special menu for tonight. Over the past year, he'd become not just a business partner, but an important part of my life. Our relationship had evolved slowly, carefully. Two people with past disappointments learning to trust again. First dinners together after the restaurant closed, discussing the menu, turning to conversations about life. Then the first kiss in the kitchen amidst the smells of fresh baked goods and herbs. The first weekend together, spent traveling to farms in search of the perfect ingredients. Nate saw the real me, not the successful businesswoman, not the gray mouse, but just Evelyn with all her quirks, fears, and dreams. And in that gaze, I found a peace I'd never known before. The kitchen was bustling with activity. A team of cooks, including graduates from our internship program, were preparing for the big night. Nate stood at the stove, concentrating, tasting the sauce from the tip of a spoon. Too much time, he muttered to himself, not noticing me. I stepped closer, watching his confident movements. Tall, with strong arms and a deceptively stern expression that softened when he smiled. "How's it going?" I asked, touching his shoulder. He turned around, and his eyes immediately warmed. "Everything's on track," he replied. Although Zoe almost caused a disaster with the desserts, I looked to the far corner of the kitchen, where our first trainee, now a pastry assistant, was concentrating on decorating small cakes. Did she do well? More than well. Nate sounded proud. She came up with the idea to use rosemary instead of mint. It was even better. He put the spoon down and hugged me for a moment. "Are you nervous about your parents?" he asked quietly. I nodded. The relationship with Mom and Dad remained the most difficult part of my new life. We'd only seen each other a few times since that scandalous dinner, strained lunches, awkward conversations. They never quite understood how their quiet Evie had become a successful businesswoman. And I still couldn't forget the years of neglect and comparisons to Diana. "They're trying," I said, in their own way. Nate squeezed my hand understandingly. "Just be yourself, the Evelyn I know." At 7 p.m., the restaurant began to fill with guests. Among those invited were our regulars, representatives of the restaurant business, journalists, and graduates of the internship program with their families. In the center of the room was the very common table, which has now become the business card of the renovated Olympus. Diane greeted the guests at the entrance, flawless in her burgundy dress, radiating confidence and friendliness. It was strange to see my sister, who had always strived for individual recognition, working so enthusiastically on a team project. My parents arrived at 7 sharp. My mother in an elegant ivory suit, my father in a dark blue jacket. They looked a little lost in the bustling crowd. "Evelyn, darling," Mom kissed my cheek. "What a lively place you have here. Busy place." There was genuine surprise in her voice. To her, restaurants had always been quiet, prim places, where they spoke in whispers and used 3 kinds of forks. "We like to think that food brings people together," I replied. "Noise is a sign that guests are comfortable." Dad looked around, clearly impressed. "Diane said you've completely changed the concept. I have to admit, it looks lively." Coming from him, it was almost a compliment. I smiled and escorted them to a table positioned so I could see the whole room, but stay out of the main traffic. My mom still looked a little wary, but I noticed genuine curiosity in my dad's eyes. The evening was moving along at its own pace. Nate personally introduced each dish, telling the story behind its creation, the specifics of the ingredients, most of which were sourced from small local farms. Zoe, our first intern, proudly brought out the desserts, accepting compliments with a shy smile. In the center of the room, strangers sat at a communal table, who by the middle of the evening were having lively conversations and exchanging contacts. This was the atmosphere we were aiming to create, a place where status and position don't matter, where everyone feels welcome. Around 9 o'clock, I rose to make a toast. The hall gradually quieted down, and all eyes turned to me. A year ago, such attention would have made me shrink inwardly, making me feel like an imposter. Now I felt nothing but calm confidence. Thank you all for coming tonight to share this special evening with us, I began. Exactly 1 year ago, in this very room, an event that many of you may have read about in the society pages took place. A slight chuckle ran through the room. The story of how a modest woman turned out to be the secret owner of a prestigious restaurant and exposed herself at her sister's birthday party really made a splash in the press. Then I said the phrase, "Let successful people pay for it." It was the culmination of 10 years of a life built on the desire to prove something, to prove to my family, to my ex-husband, to myself that I too could be successful by their standards. I looked at my parents. My mom looked embarrassed. My dad looked thoughtful. But over the past year, I've realized that true success isn't measured by status or money. It's measured by how true to yourself you are, how willing you are to share with others, to help them find their way. My gaze shifted to Diana, who was standing against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest. She nodded slightly, understanding what I was saying. Olympus has changed, as you can see. But the most important change has been in our philosophy. We are no longer a place for a select few. We're a place where everyone can feel like they're special. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Today, I want to announce our new project. Together with my partner, Nate Foster, I pointed to Nate, who was standing by the kitchen door. We're launching a chain of affordable cafes called Our Own Table, a place where quality food will be available to everyone, regardless of status or wallet. Where the principle applies. Today you can afford to pay more. Help someone who can't. An approving whisper ran through the room. Nate came and stood next to me, his presence giving me confidence. The first of these cafes will open in a month in the neighborhood where I grew up, I continued, and I'm especially pleased to announce that a graduate of our internship program, Zoe Ramirez, will be its chef. Zoe, who was standing at the dessert table, blushed in surprise, and then smiled happily. The guests applauded. This project would not have been possible without a team of people who believed in our idea. I looked around the room. My special thanks go to Diana Morrison, my sister, who developed the concept and design of the new facilities. Diane, clearly not expecting public recognition, nodded slightly. Her eyes were a mixture of surprise and pride. And of course, to Nate, I turned to him, the man who taught me that true passion was always more important than ambition. Nate squeezed my hand, and there was more support in that simple gesture than 1,000 words. I raised my glass. To your table, a place where there's always room for everyone. The guests supported the toast with applause. The evening continued, filled with conversation, laughter, and new acquaintances. I watched as my parents, who had initially kept to themselves, gradually joined in the conversation with the other guests. As Diane enthusiastically told reporters about the new project. As Nate patiently explained the secrets of sauce making to a group of teenagers from the internship program. Later, when most of the guests had dispersed, we sat in a small group around that very communal table. Me, Nate, Diana, my parents, Zoe, and a few other team members. Tired, but satisfied. The conversation flowed easily, without the previous tension. I never thought you'd choose this path, Evelyn, my mom said suddenly. But looking at all this, she said with her hand around the restaurant, I realize I was wrong. This is really yours. It took a lot to get that kind of recognition from Mom. Thank you, I replied simply. Dad coughed. When you talked about the restaurant business when you were young, I imagined something very different. I thought it was a fad, a dream without a foundation. I was wrong. We've all been wrong about something, Diana said, raising her glass. To new beginnings? We seconded the toast. I looked at these people, my family by blood and by choice, and felt a strange peace. The path that brought me here has been winding and often painful. There were mistakes, resentments, disappointments, but it is that path that has made me who I have become. There's always room at the table for everyone, I repeated quietly, looking at my sister. And for the first time in years, I saw in her eyes not a rival, but just Diana, complex, contradictory, but dear.